open the floodgates. Let the carp birdwatchers in. Hello, everybody. I'll wait just a minute. I see there's still people trickling in. It is exciting to see you all again. It's definitely a feature of having you have the meetings back to a once a month schedule that I get very excited when the meetings happen. You know, when we were doing them once a week or even once every 2 weeks, it was sort of like, oh yeah, it's meeting time again, and it was very ho-hum. But this is exciting. All right, and we have a very exciting meeting today. So let me just get to it. Welcome. This is Carpinteria Birdwatchers online meeting for May 27th, 2021. And our topic is officially Surprises Along the Coast, which is the cheesy title that I chose. But there were just a lot of cool, surprising bird events along the local coastline. So I wanted to talk about them in the meeting. I'm just going to skip most of the front matter. You all know, keep yourselves muted unless you want to talk, in which case it's fine. You know, if I don't catch your hand wave, feel free to unmute and speak up, and I'll recognize you and we can chat. Brody, I see you have your hand up. Do you have something to share?
Yes, I have a couple guests of my own today.
You have guests? Oh, you have bird guests. I can hear them. Oh, this is great. So introduce your guests, Brody.
Here's one of my new little ducks. It's a golden layer, and he's only about a week old now.
Wow.
And he's already gotten huge. It's like gotten double its size.
Those precocial young, they come out of the gate in a hurry to grow up. That's exciting.
I have a Pekin Duck. It's like the bulkiest of them all.
So this is a different duck, right? I'm not that good on my duck, my young ducks. So you got two different ducks. Do you have an assistant off camera who's handing you the ducks?
What?
Nothing. I'm just messing with you, Brody. So do you have any other birds to share?
I have 3 different species. I only got one of each species, so to bring in here because they're out in a big cage outside. So I only one.
That's okay. We want to save some time for the official content, so that's good.
This is a little mallard right here.
Cute. Well, I recognize that one. I see baby mallards all the time. Well, that's great, Brody. That's very exciting.
I actually have one more that isn't a duck. We have a little baby Rhode Island red chicken here.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And this one's wings are seriously like the biggest.
Very cool.
Duck wings are like tiny, but these ones wings are like gigantic.
Well, it's very neat to see that your bird interest is carrying you forward into new.
Yeah, we have a couple Buck Orpington chickens too, but I could not catch one. They were way too fast. I just managed to catch this one.
Okay, well, that is very cool, Brody. Thank you for sharing that. As long as we're doing sharing, anyone else have anything exciting from the last the last month that they want to share that they've been out doing while birding? I'm not seeing any hand waves, but I only have so many. I don't have everybody on my screen, so feel free to unmute and just chime in if you have something to share. All right, hearing.
Okay, I will share just one thing that surprised me last weekend. I saw a great blue heron eating ground squirrels. I knew they liked gophers and things like that, but ground squirrels was new for me. Just thought I'd share.
That is very exciting. Okay, yeah, Andy, I see you've got a hand up. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself, Andy?
Oh yeah, I was down in Simi Valley for 2 weeks, and if any of you ever get down there, they got this big lake called Rancho Lake, and they got all sorts of geese there. They got the Canadian geese, the white-fronted geese, the swan geese, and all sorts of ducks too. So it's just a fun place to go.
Cool. cool waterfowl content.
Yeah, I got a big lake with islands there. It's real nice.
Okay, well, that's all exciting news. You know, there are exciting things happening in the world of birds, and I want to get to our exciting things, so I'm going to keep rolling. I have not yet officially introduced Jenny Slaughter is our co-host for this meeting. Tom and Laurel are traveling, so they are not here, but they said they'd be excited to check it out later on the archived YouTube video of this meeting. And let's see. Oh, and we have a special guest, Jessica Nielsen. So hello, Jessica.
Hello.
And Jessica is with the Coal Oil Point Reserve. Is that the correct name for it?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you, like, I know you're involved with the snowy plover recovery program there. Do you have a thumbnail of your role you want to share, or just what it is that you officially do?
Sure. So I'm the conservation specialist for the reserve, and the reserve's mission is to support research, education, and outreach. But we also have a kind of a side mission of conservation of these snowy plovers. So that's one of our biggest programs, is the conservation program for snowy plovers. So I manage the docent program at the reserve, and I also do all of the nest and chick monitoring. So I go out several times a week during the breeding season, looking for new nests and tracking the fates of the nests and the broods once they hatch. And of course, our docents that are on the beach are also wonderful at communicating what's going on down there when I'm not on the beach. And so it's a great collaboration between our volunteers and interns and myself, and keeping the plovers safe and happy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do appreciate the volunteers. Whenever I'm there, I thank them, because it's, you know, as I've come to realize lately even more, it's very important to let people know. And we can talk about that. I want to get to the snowy plover content. So I'm just gonna zip right through the rest of the meeting so we can get to the snowy plover. I'm highly motivated to get to your part of the meeting. Okay, so I just had a couple of things to mention really quickly, and get some feedback from people on. One is that there is a new Carp Birdwatchers website. So I'm no longer sending you to carpwithoutcars.org for your Carp Birdwatchers content. You now can go to carpbirdwatchers.org. So that's where you will learn about new meetings. That's one thing. I wanted to ask real quickly, just maybe, you know what, I'm going to save this. At the next month's meeting, or maybe at a blog post at carpbirdwatchers.org, I'm going to poll people for the idea of resuming in-person outings. You know, a lot of people are fully vaccinated at this point, and we're getting a little more relaxed, which is exciting. And maybe we could resume a little out in the field bird watching together once a month like we used to do. So look at the website, look at carpbirdwatchers.org. I'm probably going to slip and say Carp Without Cars about 5 times. But look there for information about that. I'll put up a poll and kind of get feedback, what people think about that. And similarly, I'd be interested in talking about the possibility of resuming in-person meetings. You know, I think we'll probably keep doing some version of the Zoom meetings because it is awfully convenient and fun. But it would also be fun to get back in the library meeting room and have some meetings face to face. So I'll put up some information about that and maybe gather views about that. And my guess is that that'll take a little longer maybe to get to. The library isn't open for that kind of thing yet, but we'll see how that develops. Okay, so with all that said, I want to move on to the presentation. Is there anything else? I see Carla's here. Hi, Carla. I'm going to go ahead then and start the official presentation, and that would let us talk about the cool stuff that's been happening. And so take me just a second. Let's see. Which one do I want? Which screen do I want? I want this screen. Okay, so if I've done this correctly, you should be seeing surprises along the coast. Give me a thumbs up, somebody, if you see that. I see nods and thumbs. That's good. Okay. So there have been some surprises. Let's talk about them. So here's a view of the Carpinteria Bluffs Harbor Seal haul out, the pupping site. And a lot of you are probably familiar with it. There's a seal watch program where people go there and kind of help make sure that the harbor seals are able to do their pupping undisturbed by beachgoers. But there's also a lot of birds that take advantage of that beach closure. And so you see here in this photo, there's a lot of gulls in there and there's a lot of pelicans in there. And I wanted to talk briefly about the pelicans. Oh, and let me just make sure that people know where we're talking about. So here's an aerial view or a Google Maps view of this spot. And the seal haul out is basically this part of the beach right down here. And to get there, you can go to the Carpinteria Bluffs, and there's the parking at Baylord Avenue is just sort of off the screen to the right. But if you park there and then you walk down through the bluffs, you come along this grove of eucalyptus trees. You look both ways very carefully before you cross the railroad tracks because the trains come through there pretty fast. And then you can walk along this path, which goes along the edge of the bluff, where again, you should be very careful. It turns out there's a lot of hazards on your way to these seals. But then eventually you get out here to the seal overlook, and that's where you can look down and see them. Another place that I tend to park sometimes, you know, I used to park in the tea time parking lot here. This is the driving range. But, you know, they really don't want just Bluffs users parking in there. They want it reserved for their golf users. So what I do now a lot of times is I'll park over here on Carpinteria Avenue by City Hall. There's some parking along the street there. And then you can walk down here past tea time, and you can walk down this path. And then you're in the same place, and again, you can come over here. And you can also get in here from the other end, from Tar Pits Park and the State Beach Campground over on this side, in which case you follow this trail. And eventually all roads lead to the seal overlook, which is right there. So here's a photo I took there back in March of 2019, when there were a bunch of pelicans hanging out. These are really gorgeous adult breeding plumage brown pelicans. They've got the dark bellies that the adults get, and these just really colorful head and neck markings that they get in their breeding plumage. And this one has bands, which is interesting. It turns out if you use your binoculars or take a photo and you get the number off these blue bands on the pelican's legs, you can report them. And people will get back to you with information about where your pelican was banded and where it has been seen before, which is, I think, just really fascinating. And I have links in the blog post at carpbirdwatchers.org for this meeting for all of these banding reporting sites. Or you can just Google for it. It's not too hard to find. But you go and you fill out the form, and then they send you a reply. So in this case, this particular pelican, turns out, had been rescued in Malibu in May of 2016, and was cared for and then released a month later in San Pedro. And then subsequently was seen at Pilar Point and Half Moon Bay, and then my sighting back down in Carpinteria. So I just thought that was really cool. And then here is another pelican. So this goes back to May 10th of this year. So this is just a few weeks ago. And again, there's a pelican, this time an immature one. So it's still got the light colored belly that they have when they're younger. And it has a band with 1A1 on it. So I reported that. And this time I got a certificate of appreciation emailed back to me. So I felt very special. But again, it's really cool. So this bird was banded in Alameda, or near Alameda. So, up in the Bay Area, and it was, banded in, hatched in 2019, banded in November of 2020. And then again, seen by me 2 weeks ago. So it's just, I don't know, I get a kick out of it, and being able to take an individual bird and sort of know more of its history, more of its backstory is really neat. And it's you're contributing to scientific knowledge of these birds' travels. I mean, that is one of the major reasons for banding them, is so that then they can be, recovered later on, and they can gather data about where these birds go, which is very useful to know. Okay, so we're going to move on to another species. Here is a photo by Dave Ledig, taken in Carpinteria, of a really cool bird, and I want to play its vocalizations because I love them. I love their vocalizations. So this is a recording from Zeno Canto by Paul Marvin. You guys hearing that? Yeah, right. I don't know, I just think it is extremely cool. So this is, of course, a black oystercatcher, and it's a big, robust shorebird. They like to pry mussels loose with that ridiculous beak and hang out along the shore. And that call, you know, they're not too common along the coast here, but if you get out to the offshore islands, you know, Santa Cruz Island and Anacapa Island, you know, anytime I've been lucky enough to be over there, like staying on a boat, you hear that, you know, you hear that vocalization as they come cruising along the shore.
It's exactly like the Rancho.
It does have sort of a wren tit quality, yeah. It's loud too, like a wren tit. I mean, those oystercatchers, when they're vocalizing, you hear it, which I have to think is some sort of evolutionary thing. Like they're in this noisy environment with waves crashing on the rocks. They want to be heard. So they have a loud and piercing cry. So I wanted to show this though. This is from a webpage that's hosting the Santa Barbara County Breeding Bird Study, which is really cool. There was a Zoom talk that Santa Barbara Audubon did just a month or two ago, kind of with an update on this project and talking about it in detail. And I recommend you check that out if you're interested. There is a link to the Santa Barbara County Breeding Bird Study in the notes for this meeting. But what they're doing is they're gathering records, they're gathering contributions from bird watchers of nesting behavior that they can witness and document. And you can go in there and look for different species and see what are the records in their database for that species. So these are the records in the database for black oystercatcher nesting. And these little orange dots are basically all the records in that database for black oystercatcher nests. And no, obviously there have been many other black oystercatcher nests besides these, but the small number of these records and their sort of, you know, spotty distribution kind of tells you that black oystercatchers are not really common coastal breeders, certainly in our part of the coast. You know, in these relatively populated parts of the Santa Barbara County coast, you know, black oystercatchers, my impression just from the little bit of reading I've done, is they are pretty sensitive to human intrusion when it comes to their nesting behavior. You know, they nest on the ground, along the shore. And, you know, in Southern California, if you're on the ground along the shore, you're likely to get a fair amount of human intrusions. And so they, you know, tend not to nest in this part of the county along the shore. But on May 10th, Dave and Julie Ledig, his wife, noticed that these black oystercatchers that had been hanging out at the harbor seal site at the Bluffs had in fact created a nest, and they were incubating on it. So here's a photo. They first saw this on May 10th, coincidentally the same day I took my photo of that immature brown pelican at the same spot. I did not notice this nesting going on though, but they did see it on May 10th, and then they continued to see it and document that they were still there for a while after that. I found out about it when I was talking to Dave in connection with a different project that I'm working on that I will talk about maybe at the next meeting. But he mentioned just in passing, oh, did you know there are black oystercatchers nesting at the Carpinteria Bluffs? And I blinked and did a double take. I was like, oh my, no, I did not know that. So right after that, well, towards the end of that day, I got off work, which was last Friday, the 21st. I went on down there looking for this oystercatcher nest, and I looked pretty hard and could not find the nest. Eventually, I did see a pair of oystercatchers, and I thought, okay, great. They're going to show me the way to the nest. So I was following them real carefully from up there on the seal overlook, but they didn't go to a nest. They just kind of milled around in the area where I had been told the nest was. So I was emailing with Dave during this, and he said, well, you know, I'll be going to check it out after work. And then I got an email from him later that night that basically explained, oh yeah, the reason why you couldn't find the nest is it was destroyed. What happened was we had a really high wind event on Thursday night on into Friday. I don't know if you remember last week, it was really windy on Friday. Here's Thursday afternoon, a photo that Dave and Julie forwarded to me. And this is actually the oystercatcher on the nest here, just sort of below and to the left of this round rock. You can kind of see its back a little bit. And here is the next afternoon. And basically that is the nest site right there. And it is just covered with windblown sand. So, you know, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's a very dynamic environment that oystercatchers nest in. And this time, that prevented that nest from succeeding. There is a chance that they'll retry. They were presumably the same two oystercatchers were reported there, I think just a couple days ago. Tom Beland, who's usually here as a co-host, was there at the seal overlook and reported them. So they're hanging around. They may try again. If you're there looking at the seals, keep your eyes peeled. But this nest did not make it, but still very exciting. Here are the photos I took that afternoon. And in hindsight, kind of sad, these oystercatchers sort of forlornly walking around on the side of their nest. Yeah, it is a rough world out there for an oystercatcher. Just checking the chat real quick. Okay, but let's move on to this fun species. There.
John?
Yeah, Jenny.
It looks like Andrea had a question.
Oh yeah, Andrea.
It's more of a comment. I'm thinking that it would be really nice if we could get the city to close the beach all year instead of just during the seal season, because the birds obviously found it to be a good place to rest, and they need to rest all year, and the seals need to rest all year. And so maybe we could all get together and push that idea forward.
I would support that idea myself. You have one vote in favor of that idea. It's going to be tricky. The relevant issue, which I know you're aware of because you're involved in a lot of city planning issues around conservation and access. The coastline of California under the Coastal Act below the high tide line is held in trust for all the people of the state. And beach closures or coastal closures are tough to get enacted. You need to get the support of the Coastal Commission to make that happen. That the harbor seal pupping site has that closure for that period of time is, I think, very laudable and a good thing. Expanding it on behalf of birds or on behalf of the seals outside that breeding window might be difficult, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't make the case. So yeah, that's a really interesting and a good point.
I mean, people can easily walk up the bluff, walk around that area and go down on the other side. It's not like they don't have more access.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that, presumably the absence of human passage through this area was a factor in these oystercatchers deciding to try to nest there.
Yeah.
Were they to retry, at the end of the official beach closure there is May 31st, it's just a few days away now.
Yeah.
So it would be a problem, for them to be incubating there if people are going to be walking through or walking their dogs through, things like that.
That's why we need to get the whole thing closed. I guess what we should do first is talk to the Coastal Commission, you think?
Well, I don't know about, what the exact best process is. There's a whole series of hurdles you'd have to clear. Maybe starting at the city level would make sense. You certainly have the ear of some folks at the city with your work with the marsh and the bluffs. So I don't really know. I'd be interested in talking strategy with you maybe at some point. But I'm going to move on because I want to talk about these guys. Here is a recording of this species. I need to make my window bigger so I know which species I'm playing. Yeah, here's another recording by Paul Marvin from Zeno Canto. All right, and this is, of course, the snowy plover, which is probably the cutest bird in creation. I don't know, it's got a cute vocalization, it's got cute little babies, it's very cute. Even the adults are cute. Here's the snowy plover nesting records from this, again, the same breeding bird study. And you can kind of see, so they really need, a low sandy shore. They need, sandy coastline. And I'm going on and on about this stuff, but Jessica, you're far more knowledgeable than I am about snowy plovers. If you want to weigh in at any point. I'd be happy to start incorporating you more, and I'll try not to just motor mouth continuously without leaving you a chance to discuss. But just looking at these records, it's really interesting to me that, they really like the coast of Santa Rosa and San Miguel Island, which I know are low sandy islands with broad beaches, and again, essentially a complete absence of human disturbance. Other than that, the sites are pretty isolated. There's Colo Point, and maybe a few isolated nesting records elsewhere. Few records at the harbor, one record. This is just a screenshot, but if you go to the breeding bird study and click through, this is one record from, I think, 2013, where Adrian O'Loughlin saw west of the mouth of the Carpinteria Salt Marsh an adult with a few fledglings. So there was, a nesting event that happened there. But other than that, nesting, in terms of the Carpinteria area, that's the only successful breeding event from the last 60 years that I can find a record of. So really they, with the advent of humans running up and down the beach and throwing frisbees and walking dogs and doing all things that humans do along the beach, snowy plover nesting becomes a lot more difficult. And then there's a few spots up in North County, like this is near Ocean Beach Park, I think, and this would be in Vandenberg, and up here would be at the Guadalupe Dunes Preserve. So not a lot of places for them to nest, and it's kind of similar to the thing I was talking about with the black oystercatchers. That again, they're relatively sensitive to human intrusion, and so it really does affect them. I was going to talk about some of those sites, but before I go on, Jessica, is there anything important about snowy plover nesting or the pressures on snowy plovers that you would want to share? Again, I know this is a big part of your work, and you've, I'm sure, got a lot of facts to share, but just kind of putting you on the spot, what would you say is important for people to understand about the problems they face in nesting?
I would say for the plovers, it's more about having that protected habitat. I mean, for them to be successful, they really need a little bit of our support. So Colonial Point Reserve had historically been a nesting site for plovers, and they completely stopped breeding there in the late 1960s, early 1970s, right around when the beach became really accessible to the public. And so for 30 years, they didn't nest there at all. And as soon as the Plover Protection Program was put into place with fencing and signage and the docent program, within a year, we had the first successful nest at the site. So really just setting aside some space where they have some area free from disturbance by people and dogs really goes a long way. So what you were saying about, setting aside that area in Carpinteria for the oystercatchers and the seals year round would probably make a difference in allowing those birds to nest successfully there again.
Yeah, and when we get to talking about this Carpinteria nesting event that's happening now, it really does, to me, make the point that they just need a little help. They just need a little bit of space, a little bit of protection, and they'll do their part. They'll go in there and give it a try.
Yeah, if you build it, they'll come for sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to go pretty quick through this part because I want to get to talking about that sort of exciting local event. But this is up at the Rancho Guadalupe Dunes Preserve. Again, it's sort of an aerial view. This is up at the northwest corner of Santa Barbara County. You go just a little bit, over on this side, you're basically in San Luis Obispo County. And because I'm really silly that way, my interest in the birds drops off precipitously once I cross that county border, just for dumb personal reasons. But anyway, it's a really neat spot. And it has nesting snowy plovers. So I was up there on May 8th of this year and got photos of this bird, which is interesting because it is banded. And the really neat thing with these snowy plover color bands is, you get a photo or you get a decent look through binoculars. You can read those color bands and you send off an email and they will tell you where that bird was banded. And, they got the different color names. And, again, if you have a photo, you don't even have to try and figure out the colors too much. You just send them the photo and they'll figure it out for you much better than I can, at least. But here's the response I got about this bird that I saw up there on May 8th. Said it was banded as a chick and fledged from the Oceano Dunes State vehicle recreation area. Is that what SVR is? Something like that. Wintered in Malibu or Ventura and Malibu, but it has obviously made its way back because I saw it where it was banded. So again, I just get a kick knowing that this little fluff ball of a bird is making that kind of journey. So here's a view of Coal Oil Point, and if you have not birded there, I very much recommend it. It's one of my favorite places locally to go birding because it's just spectacular. You know, you can kind of come down and there's some public parking here at the end of Slough Road. And they've instituted this there's like a parking app you can use to park there just as a member of the public who doesn't have a university parking pass. It's really convenient. I really like the parking app because I always would go there and put my money in the meter or my card in the meter and buy a certain amount of time. And then I'd be out there birding, and the birding is so spectacular, I don't get back to my car in time. So I'm running the risk of a ticket. But with the app, you can put more money in the meter from wherever you are. So that's helpful. I like that. But anyway, you park there, you hike out along this road. You come out here to the point. Good sea watching from this point, as Linus Blomqvist has shared in previous meetings. But if you walk down to the beach, this whole area here, and then I guess, Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but extending well to the west along the beach is all really good snowy plover breeding habitat.
Yeah, so they nest all the way from the entrance at Sands Beach past where the slough mouth is. And they actually, during the spring and summer, that slough mouth is almost completely dry. And so they love that area for nesting because it's nice and flat and there's a lot of vegetation to kind of hide their eggs around. And then it extends past that dune pond that you see on the left-hand side. Mm-hmm. It extends another 300 meters past that pond that you see.
Very cool. So here's a photo I took on May 15th there, and it shows these enclosures, right? These anti-predator cages. I'm not sure what the official term is for them, that you put over the nests. And I'm curious, I mean, obviously you're doing it because it works, but I'm curious if you have any kind of data on like how much of a difference does that make in terms of predation of the nest itself?
So we started using these exclosures in 2019 because we had such a problem with crow predation. So we've had issues with crows in the past, kind of sporadically. We might have like a pair that's hunting on the beach and they might eat a few nests. But in 2019, it was, groups of 20 or 30 crows that would descend on the beach and just systematically eat every single nest that was active on the beach. And so we quickly realized that if we didn't intervene in some way, none of the nests were going to make it because we had already lost every active nest. And so we were afraid that the plovers would abandon the beach if they kept losing nests because the crows just kept coming back. And so we got permission from Fish and Wildlife Service to use this predator exclosure cage on all of the nests that we find. And it's had 100% effective rate of keeping the crows out. So it's definitely done its job. And it doesn't seem to modify the behavior of the birds in any way. When we first started using them, as soon as we put the cages on, we would monitor and make sure that the parent was going back to the nest to incubate the eggs. And they would always go back within a minute or two after we installed the cage. And they continued nesting normally from there. And we kind of modified the exclosure, which you can't really see in the photo, but on this exclosure, we actually used an opaque top, which is different than the exclosures that had been used at the reserve many years ago. The previous exclosures actually had a mesh top that you could see through. And this was a long time ago, probably in the early 2000s. And Chris Sandoval, the director at the time, has told me that they were having issues with adult predation. So owls were perching on top of the cage and could see the plover as soon as the plover left the cage and would eat the adult, and then the nest would become abandoned at that point. So this new design has an opaque top so that no aerial predator can just hang out above and wait for the plover to leave. And so we haven't been seeing that same level of adult predation. So it's been helpful.
That is really cool. So here's a shot. So, I mean, this is good up until the point when they hatch, right? And at that point, the baby plovers, the chicks are precocial, and so they are ready to go as soon as they come out of the egg. It's a big egg for this relative to the size of the bird, and a long incubation, compared to what we might be used to with songbirds in our garden. And that time goes into making a relatively mature bird, right? So when they come out of the egg, they're mobile and they take off. Is the cage basically the exclosure? Basically, does all of its usefulness end at the point when hatching occurs? Do they ever like go back inside there as a refuge, or are they just done with it at that point?
So it's funny you should ask, because if you asked me that about a week ago, I would have said no, they never use the cage as a refuge. But because it was just as soon as the chicks hatched, they would run out into the wild, and there's not much we can do at that point. But last week I was doing a survey with one of our student interns, and I was commenting like same thing. I wish that the chicks would use the cage as a refuge of some sort, so that we didn't have to worry about them so much when they hatched. And that same day, there was a nest that had just hatched, and the chicks were still just hanging out in the cage. And then the following day, I came back, and the chicks were still hanging out in the cage. And I guess Chris had said a crow had been circling the area. And so the chicks were all huddled in there for about a full day, which is kind of nice when they're that young and that vulnerable. It kind of gives them a chance to learn how to walk and how to feed, and they can just stay in that little 2-foot diameter enclosure. And so I have seen one brood actually use it as a refuge, and I hope that more start to do that, because I think it definitely helped them survive that crow encounter when they were only a day old.
And I'm curious about, again, they face so many threats at that point. I've seen them when the parents sort of cover them, like they'll be brooding, like you'll see an adult snowy plover that has like 6 legs coming out of it. You realize like, oh, it's got a bunch of babies under its wings. Is that a thing where they will actually go and shelter like under the parent, to avoid predators?
Yeah, they'll go under their parent if they get scared, but often when they get scared, they'll just duck down to camouflage. But if they're close enough to the parent, they will huddle underneath the parent. But that's also for them to keep warm, since they can't thermoregulate at that point. So often I'll see that behavior on like a chilly morning. The chicks will be all huddled underneath the parent for my whole survey because they're trying to stay warm.
So here's a banded bird at Coil Oil Point that I took a photo of back on May 15th. You can see this was an easy one. These are some of the color bands are not this easy, right? They get faded, and we'll see that when we look at the Carpinteria bird in a second. But this one was pretty easy. And here's another email I got from Amber Clark. I feel like I've had this ongoing correspondence with Amber Clark about these plovers. That this one was captive reared at the Santa Barbara Zoo and then released at the Coil Oil Point Reserve in 2019. And I've read about some of these before with some other birds I reported. So there's a rescue program where, like, if a nest, and you can fill me in on the details here, but my understanding is like if the nest is going to be destroyed, or there's something like a high tide event is going to destroy a nest or something, that you will actually rescue those eggs and rear them at the Santa Barbara Zoo as part of the recovery effort. Is that
exactly correct? So we don't do so much preemptive rescuing, but if a nest does get washed out by tide after the fact, we will go, and often if the tide was not too much of a swell, it wasn't too rough on the nest, we can actually find the eggs just like on the high tide line. They'll just be there, and often they're sometimes they'll have a little crack, but sometimes they're completely fine. And so we collect those eggs and take them back. We usually rinse them with fresh water if they were hit by the tide, just so that there's no salt water getting into the egg. And if it's cracked, the zoo will actually do like a little patch job using usually like Elmer's glue and some tape, pretty basic stuff. And then they incubate the eggs until they're ready to hatch. And then they raise the chicks for a little over a month until they're ready to fly and be independent. And once they've met the minimum weight requirements. And at that point, they get released back at Coil Oil Point Reserve. And one other thing we do is if it's a windy day and the eggs get buried, we will unbury the eggs and see if their parent comes back. Occasionally they do, but it's pretty rare. So at that point, we rescue the eggs. And so I thought of that when you were talking about the oystercatchers, and I was curious if anyone had considered or tried to unbury the eggs and see if they're still viable.
Yeah, I mean, the access there is, well, I mean, yeah, for something like that, I mean, clearly someone like Dave Ledig, a Fish and Wildlife person could go down there and try that. I didn't ask him about that, but it's a good question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Santa Barbara Zoo has been a wonderful partner for the captive rearing program. So
And
we
like
really
approximately
appreciate their work.
how many chicks are they rearing there? How big a program is it?
Let's see. Right now they have, I think, 6 or 7 chicks right now, and let's see, we brought them almost 20 eggs already this season. So they probably have about 20 to 25 eggs because they get eggs from other sites as well, like Oceano Dunes and Point Magoo, different sites that also need help with their rescue eggs.
And I didn't talk about it earlier in the meeting, but the population trend with this species, certainly before programs like the one that you're involved with were happening, they were in a pretty precipitous decline. They were not breeding at many sites, and then overall numbers seem to be going down quite rapidly. So just a little bit can make a difference in terms of bending that curve back upward and getting the population growing again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 years ago, we had a pretty rough year with the crows. Despite the cages, we were able to protect the nests, but the crows were going after the chicks as well. So we had a pretty low fledging rate on the beach, but we actually had a better fledging rate from the captive rearing program because so many eggs were rescued due to high tide that year that we ended up releasing more rescued eggs or rescued chicks than those that fledged in the wild. So it is a great way to kind of supplement the population and help out eggs that wouldn't otherwise not have a chance to survive.
Yeah, and I think about it in connection with other sort of prominent species, well-known species that have had a lot of human attention, like the California condor, where they essentially went to the level of capturing all the wild condors and using a captive breeding program to build up their numbers to where they could start releasing them in the wild again. And I've heard the argument before, people saying, oh, well, this is Mother Nature, why should we be intervening this way? Or why? And at least for me, the philosophical response I have to that is, well, these birds were doing just great, before humans came along and started grooming the beaches and dragging away all the kelp that they need to feed on the insects, or again, playing frisbee, running through their nests and smashing them. That for us to give them a little bit of help to offset this very significant negative impact we've had, I think is certainly justifiable. But I would assume again that you have a more nuanced understanding of that issue, having been someone who deals with it so much.
I would agree with you. I think it's definitely worth the effort, and it supplements the population. And we banned all the birds that are captively reared and released, so we're able to follow them and make sure they're actually successful once they're in the wild. And we see them breeding, like that one that you just showed. Oh, it's still in the photo. PAOR. That was a captively reared bird, and he's currently taking care of a brood of 3 chicks. So they definitely are successful, and they come back to breed year after year. And so it's a good sign that they're also contributing to the population and assimilating into the wild pretty well.
And I think it's wonderful that you have names for them all, because you refer to them by the band color, right? So it's PAOR. It's pink over aqua, orange over red. So PAOR. So I see I'm learning about these plover names. We've got a couple of questions. So Brody, I see you've got a hand up.
Yes. I think this one's the cutest.
Well, it's a very it's a competitive category. There's a lot of very cute snowy plovers out there, but I agree. This is a very cute snowy plover.
I just wanted to say, a couple days ago I saw a semi-palmated plover at the Andrea Clark Bird Refuge, and I also saw black-necked stilt, which I have never seen before, so that was really fun.
Yeah, that is very cool. And being able to compare the semi-palmated plover with the snowy plover at places like Coal Oil Point, where both of them occur, is really fun. You can really come to appreciate the differences in their coloration, and yeah, that's really neat. Andrea, you had a question too? Oh, we'll come back to you in just a second, Brody, but Andrea, did you have a question?
I was wondering if this is the marking for the birds that are captively bred at Santa Barbara Zoo, or the birds of Coal Oil Point, these colors.
Yeah, I am curious about how the colors are assigned, Jessica.
So it's more from the Santa Barbara Zoo. So when we did captive rearing at Coal Oil Point, we would use that pink aqua color for the bands. But then Santa Barbara Zoo started doing their captive rearing program, and so they've kind of adopted that pink and aqua color. But they also sometimes use, like for Oceano Dunes birds, they often use the Oceano Dunes band combination. So it kind of depends on where the bird or the egg originally came from, and also what band combinations are even available, because sometimes there is a limitation just in combinations, which is a good problem to have when you're running out of combinations because there's so many birds.
Yeah, that's neat. And Brody, or I'm sorry, were you done, Andrea? It looks like a nod. And then Brody, did you have another question?
I was just gonna say, yeah, that one, yeah, it looks a lot different. The semi-palmated plover almost looks like a killdeer, just like a really small killdeer almost.
Yeah, with that complete, it has like that complete band around the breast that the snowy plovers just have a partial band.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep on rolling because I want to talk about this site. So this is the Carpinteria State Beach. This is the mouth of Carpinteria Creek that you're seeing here, and this is the State Beach campground on either side of it. If you want to visit this site, I find lately when I want to go check out the snowy plover site, probably the easiest way to do that without paying for the day use parking at the beach is you can park over here on, what is it? Palm Avenue and 6th Street. So park on 6th Street, kind of between Reality Church and the former Maine School, the Children's Project at Maine. And then you can walk down Palm Avenue, again, being very careful when you cross the railroad tracks, but then you can walk along the access road in the campground and cross the bridge over the creek and then down this path to this section of beach. And so right now, if you go there, what it basically is going to look like is there is this, it's kind of hard to see in the photo, but there is a rope fence that surrounds an area, and I feel like it's about 100 feet long in a direction parallel to the beach and maybe about 50 or 60 feet wide in the direction, perpendicular to the beach. And they have these signs saying sensitive nesting area, because there is in fact a snowy plover nesting underway in that little section. And it's very exciting. As I say, it's been about 60 years since a snowy plover nested on this particular chunk of beach. There was, it turns out, an attempt last year that I didn't even realize, so I talked to the rangers at the state beach just this week. There was a nest in this same location, and I guess it was destroyed by a high tide, so it failed. And that bird was banded, and I think what I understand is that it was one of the birds that had been banded at the Santa Barbara Zoo rearing program, and it was a relatively young bird. And the interpretive ranger at the state beach, Heidi Ortloff, she told me, yeah, it was a relatively tame bird. Like you could walk up fairly close to the nesting enclosure and it was fine. It wasn't necessarily disturbed by people. And as we'll talk about shortly, so this bird that's there now is a different bird that's significantly more skittish. Like it reacts to the presence of people more so than that other bird did. But this was the first day that I noticed that this enclosure had been set up. It actually was, the enclosure was set up on May 10th, again, the same day that Dave Lettig found the black oystercatcher, and I photographed my brown pelican. It was a very good day for exciting bird finds in Carpinteria. But then I didn't notice it until 8 days later, and I just happened to be birding there and saw, oh wow, there's this fencing, and oh wow, there's a cage, there's an exclosure, so I immediately looked in the exclosure because I knew that was what it was for, and there was a snowy plover in there. So here is a photo of the female bird, and I'm a pretty lazy birder some ways. I tend to not try and sex the snowy plovers. The sexes are kind of similar looking, and oh, it's a snowy plover, I'm done, I can move on to other birds. But with this pair, I've paid a lot more attention, and it's been really interesting to learn the differences, because they are pretty noticeable. Once obviously, Jessica, I'm sure you're very familiar with the differences between male and female snowy plovers. But this is the female on the nest. And here's a photo of the male kind of hanging out in the vicinity. So he's just a little darker, like the dark parts on the head are darker, like this sort of patch in the auriculars is more dark black, whereas it's lighter in the case of the female, and this forehead patch is more extensive and darker. Does that sound correct to you, Jessica? Am I correctly
Yeah, that
describing
sounds
the sex
correct.
difference?
Their markings are much more distinct on the males. And then I also use the behavior as an indicator of the sex as well. Because typically the female will sit on the nest during the day and the male will sit on the nest at night. They'll kind of trade spots.
Yeah.
The male raises the chicks for the most part. Sometimes the female will help in the first few days, or if it's like the very end of the breeding season and she doesn't want to re-nest. But typically it's solely the male's responsibility to care for the chicks. And then you also see the males doing like that scraping behavior in the sand to create nest scrapes. And so that's a good indicator that you're looking at a male.
Neat. Yeah, and in this case, I've definitely noticed that the times I've been there, the female is always the one incubating, and the male is sort of, circling the area, keeping an eye on things, feeding, resting.
And they sometimes will trade off in the middle of the day if the chicks are close to hatching.
Oh, interesting.
So that's another, something to look for.
So I saw them on May 18th, and then I didn't return. And it was just a few days later, we had this big wind event, and I went excitedly to look for the black oystercatchers and found their nest destroyed. And I had this moment of, oh my gosh, is the snowy plover nest okay? I haven't been back there. So I went back there, and it was still there, which was exciting to see. I feel really bad about this photo in particular because I think I flushed her off the nest. So what I did was I was walking along the beach in the area between the rope, zone and the water, which has, been left open because people do walk by on the beach a lot. But what I did that apparently in hindsight had this effect is I stopped and looked at the nest because I was looking to examine the female bird. And again, in hindsight, I realized this was in response to me. At the time, I just thought, oh, she's moved off the nest. But having spent more time since then hanging out at a more appropriate distance and kind of monitoring her behavior and her response to people passing by, I think she did this because I stopped and looked at the nest, that she seems very sensitive to that. But in any event, she got up, she left the nest. You can see there are 3 eggs, which I understand is the normal clutch size for a snowy plover. Is that correct, Jessica?
Yeah, 3 eggs is the typical amount.
And again, surprising to me just how big the eggs are compared to the bird. Like they really, I don't even want to picture what the egg laying process is like for that bird, because it's just a ginormous egg that she has to lay. And you can see she's got bands. As she walked away from the nest, I got these photos. This was actually after I kind of started to move on. But the bands in this case are very worn, so it's kind of hard to read the color. And when I talked to the state beach ranger, she told me, yeah, the biologist who set up the exclusion, who set up the fencing and the cage, really felt like, oh, these bands are too faded. We're not going to probably be able to identify them. So, I thought, well, maybe my photos are better, or so I shared these photos and got a response actually just a few hours ago from Bill Crow, who I don't know, but apparently he's looked at a lot of snowy plover bands. And he said, oh yeah, I recognize this bird. He said, I've seen this bird before the bands got this faded. So what we're seeing here, I guess, is on the left leg is a tan or brown. I mean, I'm not sure how it's normally referred to, but it's N in the abbreviations. And then a blue band below it that is sort of lost almost all its blue, or at least, again, this is what Bill is telling me, and I'm trusting his opinion on this. And then the right leg, you can see, even though it's starting to fade, definitely has, red over blue. So he's saying this is a bird that was banded as a chick at Vandenberg, and that he saw it at Surf Beach in Lompoc in 2017. So, that would be an older bird, right? That's 4 years ago, even at that point. So this bird has been around the block a few times. Did not come out of a zoo rearing environment a year or two ago. So it maybe would explain why she's more skittish about humans stopping near the nest or looking at the nest. I'm very curious, Jessica, because I've spent a lot of time staring at these photos of these bands and trying to figure out what colors do they actually show. I'm curious if you have an opinion on what these bands are, what they look like, or what they tell you about what might have been the original band color.
I would agree with Bill that so we have a banded plover at Colloidal Point that nests every year. That's it's black over blue is what the band combo used to be, but the blue is faded completely to silver, just like this one, and that's because it was a silver service band that just got worn away over time.
Okay.
So I'd agree with Bill that that's what bird this is.
Excellent. Well, that's great to know that we've identified the bird.
Yeah,
We know
and
who she is.
Bill posts a lot to that listserv that you're talking about, and usually there's a bit of collaboration to figure out if there is a faded or a band that looks like it's worn away. We all kind of chime in and say if it could be our bird or someone else's bird, and we can kind of figure out based on where other birds have been seen.
Mm-hmm.
By process of elimination, we can figure out which one it is. So this is probably the correct band combo.
Cool. Well, I think that's exciting. So even more exciting would be if these birds can successfully fledge some young. It's a pretty challenging spot they're in, and this photo kind of hints at that a little bit. So there's a little rise a little bit to the west of the roped off area, and that's what I'm on taking this photo. I've in the last few days, I feel like I've become much more sophisticated about how to avoid making a incubating plover upset enough to leave her nest. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, but the plovers will tell you. If they get up and leave the nest, they're not doing it for their to take a stroll. They're doing it because they're agitated or they're concerned. So if you're paying attention to them, you can figure out, oh, this bird is not cool with this. I need to back off. I need to get further away, or maybe look off in another direction, or whatever it is that it needs to feel comfortable. But you can see in the background here, here's some folks who've set up their chairs on the beach. This spot there is a well-occupied campground, 80 feet away, right behind this spot, just up from the beach. And people are using this beach, and people are streaming by constantly along the water. They're streaming by on either side of the enclosure. With Memorial Day weekend coming on, it's kind of a big concern I'm having, recently, like, oh, is there going to be so much human activity that the plovers just can't handle it? I'm curious, Jessica, if people are actually respecting the rope line, at least, if they're not getting closer than that, if the bird is being flushed off the nest frequently, what does that scenario look like? Like, at what point does she get so upset that they just abandon the nest?
I've not yet seen a plover abandon a nest due to people walking by so much. They'll abandon before they make the nest, but often once they've laid the eggs, they seem to be pretty dedicated. But it is best for people to definitely keep their distance from the fence. Like, if they're walking right along the fence line, that's probably going to disturb her quite a bit, especially because she seems to be very skittish from what you've described. There are other birds we've seen nest where they nest right next to our pond trail entrance. So there's people walking by all the time, and they're nesting, 2 feet away from where the trail is, but they're the type of plover that isn't bothered as much by the disturbance. So they end up being successful there. And for some reason they choose to nest there. But with her being so skittish, that is definitely a concern, because not only do we not want her to abandon the nest, but also we need to make sure that the eggs are being consistently incubated so that they can continue to be viable.
Yeah, so I guess that's a concern. If the nest, if the nests are not being, if the eggs are not being incubated enough, it will extend the incubation time, or even make the eggs fail to hatch, right? It's because there's a fair amount of variability in how long the incubation takes.
Right. And it'd probably have to be a pretty long period of time, like a very extended period of time, for the eggs to become unviable, but it could definitely extend the incubation time if she's not sitting on the nest consistently.
And again, it's a race, right? Bad things can happen, as we saw with the Oystercatchers. It's like it takes one dog, running in there and causing havoc to make this nest attempt fail, or one crow or one gull or whatever. So that the sooner they can get those babies out of a nest and reared and able to fly, that's the goal. So while I was there yesterday, I basically set up on this little rise that's a little bit west of the site and just kind of hung out there. And again, it was very interesting to me to just see how the bird reacted, because people, even, you know, groups of people could walk by along the water's edge. And as long as they just kind of kept moving, she was fine. You know, she didn't move. But then someone sees this fencing and it's got these little, you know, plover pictures on the sign, and they go, huh, I wonder what's going on there. And they wander over and just stop and look into the enclosure, and bing, you know, she's up off the nest and moving away. So it's interesting to me. It's like, it would really be nice to have enough public education resources to basically station someone there and be able to tell people, like, yeah, there's this really cool bird here. It's really hard to see. If you don't have binoculars, you're gonna have a hard time seeing it unless you're so close that you're actually bothering it. But if you stop and look, you know, it will disturb her, and people won't even know, you know, like, these are well-intentioned people who are just sort of curious, who are causing this issue with the plover, that would not do that if they knew. So it'd be really nice to be able to just, you know, have everybody get a little plover training before they walk down the beach, but that's not realistic probably. And certainly with a busy holiday weekend, it's less realistic than it otherwise would be. I guess I will keep moving on. So this was another threat. So while I was sitting there, a husky off leash comes running down the beach, and he's having a great time, and he's just running around, and then he stopped to poop. And that was actually kind of handy, because I was able to walk down and kind of talk to his owner in a very friendly manner. You know, I'm enthusiastic, and I tried to lean into my enthusiasm, like, did you know there's these plovers here, and it's very exciting, and they haven't nested here in 60 years, and it'd be really great if you could take your dog in the other direction. I definitely noticed that the plovers were very upset about the dog. Like, both of them, you know, the female was off the nest. Both of them had kind of shifted over in that direction. Like, I'm not sure what they would do about a dog, but do they do like distraction displays? Or, I mean, what will they do if a predator is getting close to the nest? It seemed like in some cases they were actually moving in a way intended to draw attention away from the nest area. Is that something that you see them actually doing?
They do a broken wing display. So if you walk too close to a nest, or if a predator gets too close, they'll run away from the nest and kind of drag their wing around, pretend like they're injured, and make a big show of it. And they'll just go all around the area that's not at the nest to kind of distract the predator.
Yeah. Well, in this case, you know, the person was a little chagrined, but very nice about like returning in the other direction. So
that's good.
It was good. Yeah. This is the female, not right then, but a little bit later, when a person had walked by and stopped and looked, and she got up and moved over and was, you know, concerned. And then, you know, here's the male, I think, kind of maybe checking me out on my little rise. He basically hung out about 50 feet away from me and just stayed there the whole time. And I don't know if it was because he was concerned about me, or, I mean, that's where he was when I got there. And then he was in the same place when I went back and checked on them briefly today. I think maybe it's just his spot. He likes to hang out. I guess I'll say one last thing. So I have put out a call for people who want to help kind of keep an eye on the nest site, and maybe help, you know, telling people, oh, by the way, you're upsetting this bird. Maybe you would step back a little bit. We've got a sign up form. A few more people have signed up since I took the screenshot, which is great. I'm especially concerned about the Memorial Day weekend coming up because of the increased traffic on the beach. And then I'm concerned about this window a little later, because as near as I can tell, that's, if they started incubating on the 10th, that's about the date when we can expect the hatching to occur, somewhere in there. So if people are interested in going out, you know, hanging out on the beach in Carpinteria is not a terrible thing to do. And you can just sort of, you know, sit around and keep an eye on how the plover is doing, and maybe, you know, let some people know, or if there's a dog coming by, maybe ask them if they can maybe not take their dog past there. I did have a discussion with the park interpretive ranger over the last few days about this, and it's very important. I want to make sure people understand this effort has no official sanction from the state park system. We are not in any sense empowered to stop people from walking along the beach. Dogs are not supposed to be on the beach. on leash or off leash in this area, but we are not in any, position of authority to confront people, and I don't think it would be effective necessarily. Jessica, you probably have a lot more experience with dealing with people walking their dogs past snowy plover nests, and I'd be curious if you have any advice for folks about.
Well, I feel like I definitely agree with you that approaching it in kind of an enforcement manner is not the most effective way to reach out to people with dogs off leash. So we try to just be friendly about it. We actually currently can have dogs on the beach at Polio Point, but they need to be on a leash. However, about 40% of the dogs that show up to the beach are off leash when they get there. So we have docents that ask people to put their dogs on a leash, and we have a really good compliance rate after the docents talk to them. So for the most part, people are super understanding, especially when you explain why and you show, make them care. That always makes a big difference. If you can get people invested in the plovers, they're more likely to follow the rules. But yeah, just approaching people in a friendly manner is usually enough to start the conversation off on a good foot. And then from there, it's just teaching them about what's there and how big of a deal it is that there's our first potentially successful nesting site in Carpinteria in 60 years. Like, that's a big deal. So I think people will be amenable, I think, to the change. And it is a state park, so they probably also expect that they're not supposed to have their dog there at all. So
and there is, and Andrea, so you got your hand up. I'd like to hear what you have to say about this, Andrea, because I know you have a lot of information about the relevant regulations. What is
I was just going to say that this is a great time for you to write an article for the newspaper about how people should avoid the nesting area and keep their dogs on a leash.
Yeah, I know that. Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of caught me by surprise. I wasn't really planning to invest a lot of time in this, but I also feel like, wow, this is, this would be really good if this could be successful. And I don't know what the odds of it succeeding are. I assume they're not great. But if there's something we can do to help, then yeah, I'm on board with doing what I can do.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the effort. I was just thinking, because it will be so hard for people to see the plover, it might also help to have even like a small laminated photo of what the plovers and their chicks look like, just to kind of give people a feeling for how small and how vulnerable they are. And that way they can kind of put a face to the name if they don't know what a plover is.
Yeah, and that occurred to me too, and I've stopped the screen share because those were all the slides I had, that, it is human nature to want to see these cute little birds, and, how are you going to see them if you don't have optics where you can stand off at a distance? You're going to walk up and look for them. And, it's, I know that the next month's, or either next week's or the week after's Coastal View is likely to have an article about the snowy plover in it. Maybe not this snowy plover, but snowy plovers in general. Nancy Barron, who's a frequent attendee in these meetings, has been writing some really neat columns about birds in the Coastal View, and she's going to talk about snowy plovers. So, the comment I made to her in emailing about this was, gee, I just hope that what I'm doing in talking about it and on the Birdwatchers blog, or having this meeting, or what you're doing in talking about it in the Coastal View, I would hate for that to have a negative impact, that people get excited about the bird, so they go out to see it. So I think it's just a question of education, making sure they understand, why it's sensitive and what it's sensitive to. And as you say, yeah, if I could maybe go have some laminated photos, that would be really cool, because it's neat to be able to show it to them. With COVID, it's kind of problematic. Like, I was thinking, I could set up a spotting scope, and then they could get a view of the bird on the nest from a good distance, but it's like, we're not supposed to share optics, and we're kind of transitioning away from that, but I don't know that we're quite transitioned far enough to be comfortable doing that with people. I don't know.
I do miss being able to do that, because it used to be when I'd have my spotting scope during surveys, people would come up and be like, what are you looking at? And it's really cool to be able to point it right at the nest or right at a chick, and people can see it. But yeah,
because no one's going to mess with such an adorable little bird, that's just sitting on its eggs, if they actually know what they're doing. It's more that they just don't know. Okay, well, that's all the content I prepared. I'd be happy to, if you're willing to just stay a few more minutes, Jessica, if people have more questions or comments, we could entertain some more questions and comments. Andrea, I see your hand up again.
I'm sorry, it has nothing to do with what we've just been seeing, which has been lovely. But we were camping up at Taboose Creek, and it was really neat to watch the birds there. It's sage scrub, and so the birds are all in the scrub, and so we're watching, and here comes one out, here comes a different species out. I mean, it was really neat to watch them. So if anybody's in that area of Independence, California, it's a neat place to go to watch birds.
Taboose Creek. I knew the name, but I couldn't remember why I knew the name. So it's up in the Eastern Sierra?
Yeah.
We're going up there. We're going up next week, I think, or soon, 2 weeks. So maybe we can stop off there and check it out.
And they have night hawks.
Oh yeah.
Evening.
Nighthawks are very cool. They're also among my favorite birds. They're all my favorites. Right now, snowy plovers are my favorites, but that's just because I've spent the last 3 days, getting invested in this snowy plover nest. So any other questions for Jessica?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah.
Hi, Kim.
Hey, hi. Jessica, I was wondering how you got started doing what you're doing, and is it volunteer or paid?
It is paid. I first found out about the program when I was an undergraduate at UCSB, because I would go out to Sands Beach, as most of the students do at some point. And that's how I first learned about the program. And so I did my undergrad in biology and ended up getting a job in a marine biology lab on campus right out of school. And I worked for them for about 6 years and got my master's. And then at that point, I saw a job had opened up at Collier Point Reserve managing the snowy plover recovery program. And I was familiar with it from when I was going to school there. And I was just really interested in getting involved. So that's how I ended up working out there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
like, Kim, that you're exercising. You're making me feel guilty that I'm
That's
just
why I
sitting
was
down.
yeah, that's why I had myself on mute and not video, so you don't see me sweating like crazy.
Suzanne, I saw that you had your hand up too.
Yeah, hi Jessica. I know Jessica well because I used to be a snowy plover docent also over there for a couple of years. And I was wondering about one snowy plover which was special to me, to you probably too, because it was the one with a broken leg. Because we identified one little bird, a banded bird, which had a leg injury. And Jessica actually managed to catch or to trap that bird. She took it to the Santa Barbara Zoo. They put a splint on that little leg of this bird and rehabilitated it. And we released it, and we have taken pictures of the release, and it was really fun to see how it flew away. So I wonder, have you seen it again, that bird? Is it still hanging out there?
We have seen it. The last time I remember seeing it was in March, right when the plover breeding season was starting. So he may have moved on to a different breeding site. But I did yesterday, I saw a bird, and I was doing something else out in the plover habitat, and I didn't have my binoculars on me. And I saw one that it looked like white and yellow, which is what that bird had, but I couldn't see the other bands. And so I kind of think it was that same bird. So I'm going to go out there again and try to find him, because if he is breeding, that would be really good to know. But that was such a good success story that you saw the injured bird. She got like a perfect photo of it that was sent out to see if we could get permission from Fish and Wildlife Service to actually capture the bird. So it was great to have that evidence of like that he really needed to be rescued. His leg was broken. And then Jamie Miller, who works up at Vandenberg Air Force Base, is trained and has the permits to capture adult plovers. So we went out together and spent a couple of days trying to catch that plover. The hard part is that you want to catch the specific plover, but you are trying not to catch all the other ones, because as soon as you catch one, they all flush away. So we had to be very strategic with the net to be sure we were just catching what we needed.
Yeah, good job. I was so happy when I heard you caught it.
Yeah, we were too.
Yeah.
If I could just ask one more question. I don't want to end on a negative note, but I am curious, Jessica, what do you think the chances of this snowy plover nesting attempt in Carpinteria actually fledging young? What do you think the chances are that they will succeed in rearing at least one baby to be able to fly, just from your, much more experience with this?
I think there's a good chance. I mean, at Collier Point, we get a lot of human recreation, people, students from campus and community members. You know, there's a lot of parking spots out at that reserve. So on the weekends, the beach gets very busy. And with the docents, we're able to kind of manage how many people are walking in the corridor area and playing ball games and having dogs off leash and that sort of thing. But we still do have success. We have nests that are able to hatch and chicks that are able to fledge. But yeah, the biggest difficulty will be kind of managing the people around there. And also it is near a campground, so there is a bit of concern about crows, I would imagine, because
Yeah, there's a lot
crows
of
and
crows
gulls
there.
tend to like to hang out at those kinds of
Yeah.
areas.
And
So
there
I
is a
hope-
big gull flock that likes to hang out at the end of Carpinteria Creek there. You know, it's sort of
Okay.
a popular place. So I assume once the little tasty morsels of the fledglings are running around on the sand, that's going to be a big risk factor for them. It's just being plucked up by a crow or a gull.
Right. And we get big groups of gulls at the reserve, but it tends to be like, I'll see one or two that are kind of off on their own, and they tend to be the problem gulls because they start to wander around the nesting habitat and they seem more opportunistic, I guess. But the big flocks of gulls don't seem to be as much of a problem. And
Yeah,
injured gulls are really a problem because then they really just walk around searching and scavenging on the ground, and
yeah.
they tend to go after the chicks more.
Okay,
But
well,
if you do, you know, spend time out there, you know, asking people to keep their distance and keep their dog on a leash, I think it could go a long way. And if you see crows, you know, coming towards the area, we will actually like throw rocks at them, try to scare them away. Whatever we can do to keep those babies alive.
yeah, I guess I will stop short of encouraging people to attack the crows or the gulls, but I can imagine the impulse, you know, would be very powerful. Just that one moment when I saw that dog coming, you know, because I had sort of thought in advance, like, well, I don't really want to confront anybody. I'm just kind of keeping an eye on things. But then I saw that dog and I was like, oh, I'm going to go over there. You know, I'm going to go because, you know, these little birds, they've got nothing. And this dog is just going to rampage right through there. So, you know.
Right. And the owner has no idea, you know, if there hasn't been nesting at that site before, people are
No.
used to it being kind of a free-for-all beach, I guess. And if they knew what was going on, I think they'd
Well,
be
yeah, I mean, in this case, I mean, technically, everyone staying in the campground is told, you know, your dog must be on a leash, and even on a leash, there's no dogs on the beach. But enforcement is, you know, spotty probably. And this was late in the day. This was like after 6 p.m. So I think he probably figured that, well, he can get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this has been super helpful, and I really appreciate your taking all this time and talking with us about our exciting local developments and your much more exciting ongoing success up there at Coil Oil Point, just helping this threatened species reverse that slide they were on for so many years. It's very cool. Any last thoughts from you or from anyone before we wrap things up? Last chance.
Well, I want to thank you for including me in the meeting. It was nice to learn about the other birds that are nesting in the area too. So I appreciate getting to watch the whole presentation and for including me in the conversation.
All right. Well, thanks a bunch. And thank you, everybody. And send me suggestions if you have ideas for what we should talk about next time. And I'll see you guys in person soon. So long.
Thanks, Jessica and John.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.